Hi guys, my name is Now we're going to talk about the mini stories Day of Death.
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala?
Yes, arrived in Guatemala.
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive? Guatemala, right? I arrived in
You arrived Guatemala.
Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead?
You arrived in Guatemala on the Day of Death, November 1st.
Well, me, AJ, right? I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd?
No, I didn't arrive in Guatemala on November 1st. You arrived in Guatemala on November 1st.
No, I didn't arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. What day did I arrive in Guatemala?
November 1st. You arrived in Guatemala on November 1st.
November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. Where did I arrive on November 1st?
Guatemala. You arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. You arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Death, November 1st.
Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I was curious about this holiday, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Was I angry about this holiday?
No, I wasn't angry about this holiday.
No, I wasn't angry about this holiday. Was I sad about this holiday?
No, you wasn't sad about this holiday. You was curious about this holiday.
No, I wasn't sad about this holiday. I was curious about this holiday. Who was curious about this holiday?
You were curious about this holiday.
Well, I was, AJ. I was curious about this holiday.
This holiday. You were curious about this holiday.
What was I curious about?
The holiday. I was curious about holiday.
The holiday, right? I was curious about the holiday. Which holiday was I curious about? Which holiday was I curious about?
The day of the death. You was curious about the day of death.
The Day of the Dead. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. Was I curious about the Day of the Dead? Or was I curious about Christmas?
No, you was curious about the day of the death. Of course, you was curious about the day of the death. So you went to
Well, I was curious about the Day of the Dead, of course. I was curious about the Day of the Dead, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where did I go?
to the cemetery. You went to the cemetery.
To the cemetery. I went to the cemetery. Did I go to the cemetery? Or did I go to the airport?
I went to the cemetery.
Easy. I went to the cemetery. Who went to the cemetery?
You went to the cemetery.
Well, me, right? AJ. I went to the cemetery. Where did I go?
To the cemetery, right? You went to the cemetery.
To the cemetery, right. I went to the cemetery. When did I go to the cemetery?
November 1st, the day of the death. You went to the cemetery on the day of the death, November 1st.
November 1st, the Day of the Dead, right? I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Why did I go to the cemetery?
To see what was happening. I went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
Well, to see what was happening. I went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
You went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
Who went to the cemetery to see what was happening?
You went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
Me, AJ, went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where was the cemetery?
In Guatemala. The cemetery was in Guatemala. It's Guatemala.
In Guatemala. The cemetery was in Guatemala.
Guatemala.
What is the Day of the Dead?
A holiday. The Day of the Dead is a holiday. Holiday.
A holiday. The Day of the Dead is a holiday. When is the Day of the Dead?
November 1st. The Day of the Dead. November 1st.
November 1st. The Day of the Dead was and is November 1st. So I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead to see what was happening. What I found was quite interesting. Was it boring?
No, it wasn't boring.
No, it wasn't boring. Was it interesting?
Yes, it's quite interesting.
Yes, it was interesting. The cemetery was interesting. How did I feel about the cemetery?
I do felt it was interesting.
I felt it was interesting. Or I thought it was interesting. Was it boring or was it interesting?
It's quite interesting.
It was interesting. Of course, it was interesting. What was interesting?
The cemetery was interesting.
The cemetery. The cemetery was interesting. When was the cemetery interesting?
It's quite interesting on the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
It was interesting on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Okay, the atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Was the atmosphere very sad?
No. The atmosphere wasn't sad.
No, the atmosphere was not sad. The atmosphere was like a party. The atmosphere was very happy. Was the atmosphere sad or happy?
The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere is like a party. Was like a party.
The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere was like a party. What was like a party?
The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
In the cemetery, the atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery.
Where was the atmosphere like a party?
In the cemetery, the atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery.
cemetery. The cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house?
No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party. The cemetery.
No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Where were the families sitting?
Around the graves. They were sitting around the graves.
Around the graves. Right? They were sitting around the graves. Who was sitting around the graves? The family.
The families were sitting around the graves.
The families were sitting around the graves. Were they sitting around the trees?
No, they were not sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves.
No, they weren't sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves. So, where were they sitting?
Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching video. Bye.